Everyone wanted to cash in on the aliens craze back in the 80s, and a few guys really did it. I've got James Cameron electrocuting maggots, a movie so extreme even the director walked off set, and of course, the grossest sci-fi made in the 80s. Alien on Earth is an unofficial Italian sequel that has nothing to do with the original, obviously. They set it on present-day Earth. There's a space capsule that brings back these blue, glowing alien rocks, and a group of cavers goes in after them. Of course, the rocks hatch into face-hugging creatures, and from there it's just spelunking scenes interrupted by gory payoffs. People get their faces exploded by baby aliens, there's a decapitation, and by the end it's down to a couple survivors. Most of the runtime is slow, with long stretches where nothing happens. But when the movie delivers, it goes hard on the practical gore. The only reason this movie exists is to cash in on the alien name before the trademark was actually registered. Even the director, Ciro Ippolito, later admitted it's a bore, though he enjoyed the few good splatter moments. He actually fired his first director after a week, almost hired Mario Bava, then directed it himself under the name Sam Cromwell. Apparently, he used part of the budget to buy himself a car. Fox sued him for using the alien name, but he actually won in court since there was a novel called Alien in the 1930s, so Fox didn't have exclusive rights. This is one of those straight-up alien clones from the 80s. It's got a space crew landing on Titan, unleashing an alien monster from an abandoned lab. One by one, the astronauts get picked off, but this time the creature's got an extra move. It can use brain leeches to control people, so you get a bit of zombie action on top of the rubber suit monster mayhem. The crew runs around in dark corridors, fighting off both the monster and each other. There's even a competing crew of German astronauts thrown in just because. The movie's director, William Malone, admits he just followed the genre's rules, so there's not much new here except for the mind control angle. The wild card is Klaus Kinski, who shows up for a handful of scenes as a deranged survivor. He at least brings this weird energy that's somehow both off-putting and entertaining. The movie is derivative, but I gotta give it some credit for the atmosphere and decent effects on a tiny budget. They spent about $750,000 on it. Creature even got a Saturn Award nomination for the monster design. It was actually a complicated puppet with 4 or 5 operators inside. Forbidden World is Roger Corman's answer to Alien, and it doesn't even try to hide it. A genetic research lab on some far-off planet tries to solve a food crisis and ends up creating Subject 20. It's a monster that immediately mutates, escapes, and starts turning the crew into protein goo. Every 5 minutes, there's either a gory creature attack or someone is getting half-naked for no reason. The big move at the end is pure exploitation genius. They figure out the monster can be poisoned by cancerous tissue, so they literally feed it a cancerous liver and it eats itself to death. The director, Alan Holzman, was given 4 days to slap together an opening sequence using whatever Corman had lying around. When it worked, Corman greenlit a full movie, and they shot the whole thing in under 3 weeks. And yet somehow Forbidden World managed to get 3 Saturn Award nominations for creature effects and makeup. Even the LA Times called it lively and gruesome in a good way. Basically, it's typical Corman, fast-paced, trashy, and completely shameless. DeepStar Six came out in 1989, right before The Abyss, and the setup is basically Alien but on the ocean floor. There's a crew of Navy engineers and scientists living in an experimental deep-sea base, and they end up unleashing this giant sea monster from a cavern below. The crew tries to hold it together while the monster picks them off one by one. Some get taken out in classic creature feature style. One guy's literally bitten in half, and another panics and sets off a nuclear missile explosion. All in all, it's pretty straightforward and actually kind of tame compared to other movies like it. It was directed by Sean Cunningham, the same guy who did Friday the 13th. He rushed it out fast so it would beat The Abyss to theaters, and you can feel it. The whole thing runs on a smaller budget, about $8.5 million, and you see a lot of old-school animatronics and miniatures for the creature. If you like that stuff, you'll appreciate it, but there's no denying it's pretty cheesy. Most reviews just called it a weak alien knockoff set underwater. Leviathan came out just a few months after DeepStar Six, and it's the more high-profile take on the whole alien under-the-ocean idea. A crew at an undersea mining station stumbles on a sunken Soviet ship, the Leviathan, and accidentally brings a mutant organism on board through a bottle of contaminated vodka. Crew members start mutating into a huge, grotesque creature that crawls the station's corridors, taking people out one by one. It's basically The Thing mixed with Alien, just underwater. You get all the classic beats: a corporate boss who's only out for herself, lots of dark corridors, and that claustrophobic feeling. The difference is that Leviathan actually has a solid cast with Peter Weller and Ernie Hudson. Stan Winston handled the creature effects, and there are some genuinely nasty transformation scenes. The monster effects here are a big selling point. Leviathan got a lot more money to work with than DeepStar Six, around $21 million, and was a studio production. But it still didn't make it big at the box office, pulling in about $19 million. After a plague wipes out most of humanity, the survivors hole up underground. Outside, you've got these mutants roaming around. Everyone calls them gargoyles. Eventually, one of these creatures gets inside the bunker, and what follows is a siege movie in tight corridors. It's basically Alien meets the Omega Man, but on a budget. The plot doesn't just steal from Alien, it goes all in. The creature is also assaulting women and making them pregnant, so you end up with this full grindhouse spin on the alien reproductive horror thing. There's even an emergency mutant cesarean at one point. It's totally nuts, and yet the tone stays serious. They even managed to get George Kennedy to show up as the leader of the bunker. Basically, it's late 80s rubber monster schlock with mutant monster pregnancies twist. But the story is wild enough that they even did a direct-to-video sequel a couple of years later, with Andrew Stevens, the hero here, coming back to direct. This one is basically Alien, but made for TV. It aired on ABC in 1981 and puts the action on an isolated oil rig out in the Gulf of Mexico. The crew drills too deep, finds some prehistoric eggs, and of course, unleashes a creature that starts picking them off. At first, it's a parasite, chestburster style, then it grows into a bigger, lumbering beast. You get all the alien beats: gestation, hiding in ducts, crew members getting picked off, but this time it's done with network TV restrictions. The violence and gore are pretty much dialed back, and most of the attacks are implied. There's some effective suspense, especially for a TV movie, and the atmosphere works. You can tell they shot everything on a soundstage full of pipes and machinery to make it feel claustrophobic. The monster suit isn't anything special, so they mostly keep it in shadows or off-screen. There's even a scene where someone explains the creature's life cycle straight out of Alien's playbook. It's not scary by modern standards, but for a TV movie in 1981, it pushed the line a little. Sometimes it gets mentioned as one of the better Alien knockoffs on television, which, let's be honest, isn't a big category. Inseminoid is one of those wild British alien knockoffs that goes straight for the exploitation angle. A crew of 12 archaeologists is on a remote planet exploring underground caves when an alien creature attacks and impregnates one of the women. After that, she basically loses it, turns homicidal, and goes after the rest of the crew while the alien baby grows inside her. She gets superhuman strength, starts eating people, and the movie ends with a pretty gross alien birth scene. It basically mashes up Alien's body horror with 80s slasher stuff, and there are some pretty wild moments. The infamous one is the insemination scene itself. Women strapped down, the alien has this weird translucent appendage, and green fluid everywhere. They shot it as a sort of surreal, dreamlike sequence to get past the censors, so it wouldn't just be a straight-up assault scene. Inseminoid actually did well at the box office in the UK and overseas. Director Norman J. Warren made money on it, but critics trashed it hard. There's even a story that BAFTA members called it commercial rubbish, the kind of thing the British industry shouldn't be making. And for all the talk of it ripping off Alien, 20th Century Fox apparently didn't care. Warren said Fox actually sent him a letter wishing him luck with the movie. A small fishing town gets attacked by mutant fishmen, basically gilled humanoid creatures created after a cannery's genetic experiments on salmon. These creatures show up, start killing men, and attacking women in some of the most over-the-top scenes of the era. Their goal is to breed. This is exploitation horror through and through, so the movie is basically a bunch of bikini-clad women being chased and assaulted by the creatures. And in between the carnage, you get subplots with local fishermen fighting a big corporation and some barely developed threads about racial tensions with a Native American character. But all of that is background noise. The real focus is on the monster mayhem. There's a carnival scene at the end where the creatures invade, tearing apart the town, killing men, and dragging women off in front of a screaming crowd. Then, just when you think it's over, there's a final shot where one of the surviving women gives birth to a slimy humanoid baby. The monsters themselves were designed by Rob Bottin, so they actually look great, tall and slimy with big bulbous heads. The movie was slammed by critics for the content, way too much nudity and violence for the time. Star Ann Turkel even tried to get the movie pulled and failed, but it actually did pretty well at the box office, around $3 to $4 million. Breeders is one of those movies that really goes for broke on the sleaze factor. You've got an alien creature loose in 1980s New York, attacking young women, specifically virgins for whatever reason, and implanting them with alien embryos. These victims are always conveniently models or college students. They end up in this trance, basically comatose, and then wander off into the sewers where the alien has set up a kind of nest. There's a slime-filled lair, cocoons, and a bunch of goo-covered women waiting for the alien offspring. There's a detective and a health inspector trying to figure out what's going on, and the movie throws in every exploitation trick in the book. There's even a hospital scene where one woman just explodes with alien larvae, trying for that alien chestburster moment. It's all so cheap and sleazy it turns into a kind of trash spectacle, like a late-night cable knockoff of Alien with softcore vibes. And there's actually a reason for all the sleaze. Tim Kincaid directed this, and before this he made adult films under the name Joe Gage. So it's basically a porn director's take on an alien invasion movie. Contamination is basically Italy's answer to Alien, only they crank up the gore and drop the whole thing on Earth. The story starts with a ship arriving in New York packed with giant green alien eggs. Every time one of these eggs bursts, it sprays this toxic slime on anyone nearby, and then full-body explosion. Limbs, blood, guts, all over the place, and it happens a lot. That's the real selling point. Non-stop, over-the-top splatter. A government task force gets called in to figure out what's happening. What made Contamination famous are the explosions. This is literally the only reason to watch this. Every time an egg bursts, you get these wild, slow-motion shots of people blowing apart, guts and fake blood everywhere. It even got the movie labeled as video nasty in the UK. Tapes got seized, and it was banned for a few years. The movie even mixes in a little spy movie energy. There's a touch of James Bond-style mystery as they hunt for the source. But mainly it's an excuse for as many gooey FX scenes as possible. Alien had one chest burster. Contamination has dozens of exploding bodies. The pace is fast, the violence is constant, and if you're into gory Italian genre movies, it actually delivers. The score by Goblin is legitimately good, really gives the film its atmosphere, and it's one thing everyone agrees on. Blue Monkey, also known as Insect, is one of those Canadian sci-fi horror movies that basically nobody talks about, but it's a real find if you're into creature features. A handyman gets infected by something weird at a greenhouse, and before you know it, there's a giant insect monster loose in a hospital that's been locked down for quarantine. So now you've got doctors and a detective running around trying to stop this bug from getting any bigger. The rest of it feels like a 1950s creature movie, but with 80s gore, neon blue lighting, and every stock character you can think of. There's tough cop, pretty scientist, grumpy administrator, all fighting a slimy monster in hospital hallways. The whole idea was to cash in on aliens. Producer Sandy Howard was pretty open about it. The movie basically swaps out Space Marines for hospital staff and lets them go to war with a big bug. The director, William Fruitt, keeps it pretty light. He's going for an old-school, cheery monster movie vibe instead of straight horror. So you get some gooey effects, but nothing really extreme. The effects are better than you'd expect for the money, and the monster puppets actually look pretty good for a B-movie. Biohazard is a true bottom-shelf sci-fi horror. It was made on a $250,000 budget by Fred Olen Ray, who basically specialized in these kinds of movies. A secret government lab in the desert is using a psychic to teleport objects from another dimension, but instead she brings back a rubbery alien that goes on a rampage. The psychic teams up with an army officer to try to stop the creature, but most of the movie is just the alien clawing faces off townsfolk and leaving behind its own version of face huggers. The movie tries to be Alien, but with about 1/1000th of the budget. The alien is small, green, and basically looks like a guy in a reptile suit, because that's exactly what it is. Fred had his 8-year-old son wear the monster suit to save money. The whole production nearly collapsed when the initial funding fell through, so Ray had to grab whatever was shot and try to sell it at a film market in Milan. He somehow found new backers to finish the movie. Most of it was shot guerrilla style in California. Lots of scenes were filmed without permits, so the crew was dodging police between takes. The whole thing looks cheap as hell, but you kind of have to respect that hustle. If you want to see where Stranger Things got its monster ideas, Biohazard is worth tracking down. Not scary, but definitely a fun ripoff to watch with friends. Deep Space is another Fred Olen Ray special. The guy was on a mission to squeeze every last drop out of the alien's formula, and this time he brings it to suburban California. A secret military satellite crashes in the suburbs, and out comes a government-engineered monster that starts picking people off. Charles Napier plays your standard tough cop, paired with his new partner, played by Ann Turkel. They team up, track the thing through LA, and get some help from a psychic, Julie Newmar, for about 3 minutes, but she makes it count. The monster's a classic 80s creature, tentacles, claws, a head that's straight out of Alien sketchbook, and it slithers around in sewers and warehouses. There's a warehouse cat scene that's almost a shot-for-shot of Alien. Security guard looking for a missing cat, Alien comes out of nowhere. You know how it goes. Deep Space is basically Dirty Harry meets Alien, and it never pretends to be anything else. But honestly, as far as Alien knockoffs go, this is one of Ray's better efforts. You get a messy, gooey, practical effects climax that almost makes up for the slow first half. Galaxy of Terror is one of the most notorious Alien knockoffs ever made, and it kinda earns the reputation. Roger Corman produced it, so you already know what to expect. There's a space rescue mission, a haunted planet, and a crew being picked off by monsters. The ship lands on this dead world, and each character basically gets attacked by their own worst fear. One astronaut is terrified of worms, and sure enough, later she gets attacked by a giant maggot. Another is scared of crystals and ends up being killed by living crystal. Every crew member goes down, one by one. Every corridor here looks borrowed straight from Alien. But what really put this one on the map is a scene nobody can forget, the infamous maggot attack. That wasn't even in the original script. Corman decided halfway through that the movie needed more sex and nudity. So he told the director and screenwriter to add a scene where a giant grub attacks and violates the astronaut Demaya. The scene was so extreme the director refused to film it, even walked off set. So Corman did it himself, and the result is one of the sleaziest moments in cult sci-fi. Actress Toffee O'Connell actually had no idea this was coming when she signed on. She thought she was playing a serious astronaut. For all that, Galaxy of Terror is still loaded with talent. James Cameron worked as production designer and second unit director, so the sets and monsters actually look pretty decent here, like Alien with about 10% of the budget, and Robert Englund shows up in a rare non-Freddy Krueger role.